She kept books under her bed. Not as decoration, not as props arranged for the benefit of photographers who came to document her glamorous life, but because she read them, in the night, when the performance was over and the face was off and there was nothing left to maintain. She read Dostoyevsky, Whitman, James Joyce, Heinrich Heine in the original German, which she was teaching herself. Carl Sandburg, about whom she wrote with such warmth and clarity in her letters that Sandburg himself, when he met her, was startled to find that the woman who had written so perceptively about his work was the same woman the posters had been making promises about. He was not the only one who was startled. The startling of people who met Marilyn Monroe and found, behind the extraordinary face and the performance that the face required, an actual mind. This startling happened so consistently, across so many years and so many different kinds of people, that the consistency itself becomes the story. Why were they always surprised? What does it mean that the world arranged itself so thoroughly around the idea that she could not be intelligent that the evidence of her intelligence registered, every single time, as a shock? It means something about the world. It means something about what the world needed her to be. It means something about the very particular cruelty of a culture that creates images of women so totalizing, so complete, so fully satisfying to the imagination, that the actual women underneath them become almost impossible to see. She read Ulysses. She carried it around on film sets in the early 1950s, the thick, notoriously difficult novel, and she read it in her dressing room between takes, and she had thoughts about it. When the producer Jerry Wald expressed surprise, she reportedly said, with the particular quality of patience she had developed for the management of people who underestimated her, "You shouldn't be surprised. I've always liked words." She had always liked words. She had been writing since she was a child. Poetry, fragments, observations, the careful notation of the world as she moved through it. She filled notebooks with it. Not the famous red notebook, not the record of overheard conversations, but a different kind of notebook, a more personal one. The ongoing project of a mind that needed to make sense of its experience and had chosen language as the tool for doing so. The poetry she wrote has been published, after her death, in collections that tend to be treated as curiosities. Touching, surprising, evidence of unexpected depth. But reading it as literature rather than as celebrity artifact, it is genuinely good. Not perfect, not the work of someone who had the time and the education to fully develop the gift, but real. Specific. Grounded in image and observation in the way that good poetry is grounded. There is a poem she wrote about a tree in winter that has an image in it, a single image, that any serious poet would be pleased to have written. She wrote it in a notebook, for no one, in the night between one performance and the next. She was a serious reader of philosophy. This surprises people more than the poetry, for reasons that are themselves revealing. Arthur Miller, who was by anyone's account an intellectual man, said that she had a philosophical mind, that her questions were not the questions of someone decorating her personality with the appearance of depth but genuine questions, arising from genuine puzzlement about genuine problems. She was interested in questions of identity and authenticity, which makes sense given that she had spent her adult life being someone that the world had largely constructed, and was trying to find the border between that construction and whatever was actually her. She was interested in questions of responsibility and freedom, which also makes sense. She was interested in the relationship between private experience and public life, between what is felt and what is permitted to be expressed. These were not abstract philosophical interests. They were her life, rendered as questions. She studied at the actor's studio not, as some accounts have suggested, as a kind of social climbing or celebrity validation, but because she was genuinely committed to understanding what she was doing when she acted. She wanted to know why it worked. She wanted to understand the mechanism, what happened in the body and the mind when you inhabited a character, what the relationship was between your own experience and the characters, how you used what you knew to make something true. Lee Strasberg, who was not given to extravagant praise, said she had the most complete and natural grasp of the method he had seen in any student. He meant it. He said it to people other than her, in contexts where he had no reason to flatter. She had an instinctive understanding of something that more academically trained actors sometimes struggle to reach: the difference between performing a feeling and having it. She understood, from long experience of performing feelings she was not having, exactly how hollow performance felt from the inside, and she understood that the audience, even when they could not articulate it, registered the difference. Her commitment to the actor's studio was a commitment to closing that gap, to learning how to bring real experience into the work, how to make the acting as genuinely inhabited as she could make it. She was funny. This is perhaps the least expected thing about her, for people who know her primarily through the photographs, the iconic, serious, luminous images that have been reproduced for 60 years. In person, she was funny. Not the manufactured, breathy comedic timing of the film performances. Though that was real too and was a genuine comedic gift. She was funny in the way that perceptive people are funny. She noticed things, she had a way of articulating what she noticed that was both accurate and surprising, and she had the timing that comes from having spent a lifetime reading rooms. People who knew her well speak of this consistently. The wit, the quickness, the specific quality of her humor, which was not mean but was extremely precise. She was also, by many accounts, a gifted mimic. She could reproduce voices and mannerisms with an accuracy that people found both impressive and slightly unnerving, as though the woman who was so carefully observed was also, when the occasion arose, doing her own observing with equal care. She did impressions of people she had met, studio executives, directors, the various types she had encountered in her years in Hollywood, that were devastating in their accuracy and that she performed only in private, for people she trusted, without the performed quality that might have made them feel like performance. She trusted very few people. This is one of the consistent things about her, and one of the saddest, given how much she needed connection. The people she trusted, Ralph Roberts, Paula Strasberg, her psychiatrist Dr. Greenson in the periods when the therapeutic relationship was working, a small number of friends from different periods of her life, describe someone completely different from the public person. Private. Specific. Full of opinions and observations and a particular quality of attention that made people feel that she was genuinely interested in them. Not performing interest but actually, specifically curious about who they were and what they thought. She asked questions. This is something that multiple people mention, in different words, in their accounts of knowing her. She asked questions and then listened to the answers, which is a rarer combination than it sounds. She asked about your life, your work, your ideas. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered what you had said the last time and asked about it. The experience of having Marilyn Monroe's full attention, turned toward you with this quality of genuine interest, was apparently something that people did not forget. She remembered everything. Her memory was extraordinary, not just for lines, which she was famous for sometimes struggling with on set, but for everything else. She remembered conversations from years before. She remembered the specific things people had said, the specific details of experiences she had shared or been told about. She quoted from books she had read, accurately, without looking. She held information in a way that startled people who had assumed, from the public image, that the mind would be as decorative as everything else. The struggles with lines on film sets have been extensively documented and extensively used as evidence of her instability, her unprofessionalism, her essential inadequacy. What has been less examined is the nature of those struggles. People who worked with her closely on sets described something more specific. She did not struggle with lines she cared about. She was meticulous with dialogue that she believed in, that she felt was true to the character. The struggles tended to occur with lines that she found false, or that required a quality of vacancy, a specific kind of non-presence, that was in fundamental conflict with her own quality of hyper-presence. She was too there. That was the problem, often. She was too fully in the scene, too genuinely in response to what was happening, too actually affected by what she was supposed to be pretending to be affected by. Directors who worked with her in ways that accommodated this, who shot multiple takes, who used her genuine reactions, who understood that what looked like inconsistency in preparation was sometimes the overflow of a genuinely responsive performer, described the results as extraordinary. She was curious about science. This is perhaps the most unexpected fact about her intellectual life, the one that fits least neatly into any familiar narrative. She was genuinely interested in physics. She read popular science books, asked scientists she met at parties about their work with the same focused attention she brought to everything else, and appears to have been particularly interested in questions about the nature of reality. The quantum mechanical questions about observation and existence that were, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, beginning to filter into broader culture. She connected these questions, in her private writing, to her own experience of being observed. The strange physics of a life lived almost entirely in public, the question of whether the thing observed was altered by the observing. She was asking, in her own way, the questions that serious thinkers were asking. She was doing it without the institutional support, without the education, without the language that might have given her a more formal framework. She was doing it in notebooks, in therapy sessions, in conversations with the small number of people she trusted enough to think aloud with. She wrote a note to herself, found among her papers after her death, that researchers have returned to repeatedly because of its combination of simplicity and depth. It says, "What I want is to matter as myself, not as a reflection of what someone else wanted to see." 6 words at the end of a life of being seen: to matter as myself. She wanted to be known. Not famous. She had fame, she understood exactly what fame was and exactly what it was not, and she was not confused about the difference. Known. The specific, non-transferable experience of being understood by another person, of having your actual inner life recognized and responded to, of existing in someone else's mind not as an image but as a person. She was a brilliant woman who lived her entire life in a world that needed her to be something simpler. A world that had built an image out of her raw material and then tried, systematically, to make her inhabit the image rather than the person. The image was easier to manage. The person was inconvenient, too curious, too perceptive, too full of genuine response and genuine opinion and genuine knowledge. The image made money. The person was a problem. She refused, finally, to be only the image. She had always refused it, in the private notebooks and the books under the bed and the questions she asked the scientists at parties and the poetry she wrote for no one in the night between performances. She had always been, in the private spaces the world did not photograph, the person she actually was. In the summer of 1962 she decided to be that person in public. To speak in public with the full weight of what she knew and what she had thought and what she had refused to let the world reduce her to. She deserved to be heard. Not because she was Marilyn Monroe, the icon, the symbol, the image on 1,000 products. Because she was Norma Jean, who kept books under her bed and read them in the night and taught herself German and wrote poetry for no one and asked the scientist how the universe worked. Because she was brilliant and curious and paying attention. Because she mattered as herself. And because the world, which took so much from her, owes her at very minimum the recognition of what she actually was. Not what it needed her to be, but what she was underneath the image, in the notebooks, in the rooms where the cameras were not. The real Marilyn Monroe is still there. In the work that survives, in the writing that has been published, in the accounts of people who knew her and have finally told the truth about what they knew. She is still there. And she is extraordinary. She was always extraordinary. That was never the question. The question was whether the world would ever be honest enough to admit it. We are still working on that. We are getting there. She would have appreciated the effort. She became. Against everything. Despite everything. The books are still there, under the metaphorical bed of her legacy. Read them. They will surprise you. They will remind you that the most famous face of the 20th century belonged to a person who was reading Dostoyevsky and writing poetry and asking the physicists about quantum mechanics and trying, every day, to understand what it meant to be alive. That person deserved the world she was trying to build. We are still building it. She showed us what to aim for. Norman Rosten was a poet, a genuine one, and one of Marilyn Monroe's closest friends. He and his wife Hedda became part of her New York life in the mid-1950s, part of the small circle she built around herself in the years of the Actors Studio and the Arthur Miller period, the years when she was working hardest at the project of becoming her actual self. He knew her as well as anyone, and after her death he wrote about her with the specific honesty that comes from real grief, not the managed, performative grief of people who want to be associated with the tragedy, but the grief of someone who knew the person and is trying to describe what was lost. He said she was one of the most naturally poetic people he had ever known. Not in the sense of flowery language or sentimental expression, but in the actual sense, the sense of someone who saw in images, who found the specific, surprising connection between one thing and another that is the fundamental move of poetry. He said her conversation was full of these moments, the unexpected comparison, the image that revealed something you had not been able to see before, the word that suddenly made the thing visible. He published some of her poems after her death. He was careful about it, respectful, not exploitative, genuinely trying to let the work be seen on its own terms. The poems are good. They are the work of someone who could have been a serious writer if the world had arranged itself differently, if she had been given the education and the time and the space and the simple freedom from the crushing requirements of being Marilyn Monroe. She did not have those things. She had margins of time, interstices between the requirements, and she used them. The night hours, the mornings before anyone arrived, the quiet that she found in New York in a way she never quite found in Hollywood. She used them to write, to read, to think. Carl Sandburg visited her on the set of one of her films, summoned by a mutual friend who wanted to introduce them. He expected to find the movie star, the image, the public phenomenon. He found, sitting in the dressing room with a copy of one of his books, a young woman who had been thinking seriously about what she had read and wanted to talk about it. He stayed for several hours. He said afterward that she had asked him questions about his work that no interviewer had ever asked him. Specific, perceptive questions that demonstrated a reading not of his reputation but of the actual text. He called her a phenomenon, but in a different sense than the world usually meant. He meant a natural phenomenon, something that arrived unaccountably, without adequate explanation, bearing gifts the world had not arranged for and did not quite know what to do with. She was a phenomenon in that sense. Arriving from nowhere, from the charity ward and the foster homes and the orphanage and the van news kitchen, carrying gifts, the face, yes, but also the mind, the humor, the sensitivity, the extraordinary quality of attention, that the world consumed hungrily while consistently failing to understand what it was consuming. It was consuming a person. A specific, remarkable, irreplaceable person. The books are still there. The poems are still there. The conversations are preserved in the accounts of the people who had them, the letters she wrote that have survived, the testimony of people like Norman Rosten and Carl Sandburg and Paula Strasberg and Ralph Roberts who encountered the real person and remembered what it was like. She was real. She was brilliant. She was funny and curious and deeply, seriously engaged with the world and its ideas and its problems. She was Norma Jean, who kept books under her bed. That person deserved a longer life and a better world. We are still trying to build the world she deserved. The least we can do is finally see her clearly. There is one more thing that people who knew her consistently mention, and it is perhaps the most important thing and the most overlooked. She was kind. Not the performed, professional kindness of public people maintaining their image. Not the strategic warmth of someone who understood that likability was an asset. Genuinely, specifically kind, to crew members on sets, to the people who drove her car and made her food and cleaned her house, to children, to animals, to people who were struggling in ways she recognized from her own experience. She tipped generously. She remembered birthdays. She asked people how they were and waited for the actual answer. She noticed when someone was having a hard time and said something, privately, without making it a performance of her own sensitivity. She carried food to homeless people in New York. This is documented. Her secretary and friends mention it in their accounts, the quiet practice of someone who had known hunger in a specific, early way and had not forgotten it. She did not talk about it publicly. She did not arrange for photographs. She did it because it seemed like the right thing to do, and she was a person who, in her private life, tried to do the right things quietly. She gave money to causes she believed in, civil rights organizations, children's charities. She gave it without attaching her name, which cost her the public credit that celebrities of her era accumulated through visible charity. She did not want the credit. She wanted the effect. She was kind. She was brilliant. She was funny and perceptive and courageous and deeply committed to the ideas she held, including the idea that the world should be better than it was, that powerful people should account for their power, that truth, said clearly, was worth the cost of saying it. These qualities, taken together, describe a person the world was extremely fortunate to have in it. A person the world used, and diminished, and ultimately, if the questions that refuse to go away are answered the way the evidence suggests, silenced. The real Marilyn Monroe was this person. Not the image. Not the tragedy. Not the symbol. The person who read Dostoyevsky and wrote poetry and asked the scientists how the universe worked and carried food to homeless people in New York and tried, every day, to be braver and more honest than the world had taught her she was allowed to be. She was magnificent. She deserved a better world, but we are still working on it.